Madam President,
Senator for Minnesota.
I rise today in strong support of the historic nomination of Deb Haaland to serve as Secretary of the Interior. When Representative Haaland appeared before the Senate for her confirmation hearing, she opened by saying, "My story is unique." Haaland is a 35th generation New Mexican, an enrolled member of the Laguna Pueblo, and will be the first ever Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary. National Congress of American Indians President Fawn Sharp noted that it is fitting that as we celebrate Women's History Month, Deb Haaland is poised to make it. Her nomination is a historic choice and a moment of deep meaning to tribal nations and Indigenous people across the country who have seen over and over again the federal government fail to keep its promises to Native people, promises made in law and treaty. It is clear to me that we need Representative Haaland's strong voice for stewardship of our public resources and cultural resources and public lands, for action on the climate crisis, and for making sure that the federal government lives up to its treaty and trust responsibilities for tribal nations and their citizens. Representative Haaland's background and her life experiences make her perfect for this job. As Haaland said during her confirmation hearings, if an Indigenous woman from humble beginnings can be confirmed as Secretary of the Interior, our country holds promise for everyone. The Interior Department includes the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which manages the federal government's relationship with American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities. Indigenous leaders across the country have expressed broad bipartisan support for Representative Haaland's nomination because they know that she will bring a personal commitment to lifting up Native voices and addressing deep inequities and long-standing funding challenges on tribal lands. The department is also responsible for public lands, energy resources, and wildlife conservation. And so it requires a leader who understands the cultural and economic value of these resources and the importance of conserving them. Representative Haaland grew up with a deep affinity for public lands, for responsible land use, and for hunting and fishing. In fact, her family on her father's side is from Minnesota, where she tells me she learned a lot about the joys of walleye fishing. In the House, Representative Haaland served as the chair of the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands, and she has earned the support of hundreds of groups working on climate change, conservation, and public lands management. And Representative Haaland has been a champion for the tragic crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So here we have a strong, capable, competent leader ready to serve our country as the first Native woman to lead the Interior Department. So, colleagues, I can't help asking here during Women's History Month, why is it that almost 2 months after President Biden's inauguration, Representative Haaland is one of the last 3 core cabinet members to be confirmed in the Senate? And why is it that she has faced such ferocious opposition from some Republicans? Colleagues, over the last 3 months, Representative Haaland has been called extreme and radical. One Republican senator I serve with on the Indian Affairs Committee labeled Haaland, and I quote, "a hardline ideologue with radical views." This from a person who spent months promoting the false and widely debunked conspiracy theories about voter fraud in our election. Another Republican senator called Representative Haaland, and I quote again, "a socialist left of Lenin whack job," though later he said he merely meant to call her an extremist. In the House, a member of my own Minnesota congressional delegation orchestrated a hit campaign on Representative Haaland, attacking her position on natural resources management and the boundary waters. Strangely, this same member happily supported Secretary Vilsack's confirmation, even though he holds exactly the same position. As our former colleagues Tom Udall and Mark Udall said in an op-ed in USA Today, it is hard to imagine that either of them, were they nominated to be lead Interior, would have faced the same attacks for radical ideas. I just find it difficult to take these Republican attacks at face value. My colleagues should know that Representative Haaland was named the most bipartisan House freshman in the last Congress. If that's what a hardline ideologue looks like, maybe we should all aspire to the role model that Deb Haaland provides. Colleagues, I think we need to be honest with ourselves about what is going on here. Once again, a woman, and a woman of color, is being held to a different standard, and we need to name it. We have got to come to grips with the reality that time after time, strong women, and especially women of color, are attacked when white men with the same views are welcomed to walk right through that door, unopposed. At their worst, these efforts, these attempts to portray Representative Haaland as extreme and unqualified shows how much work we still have to do to reckon with our country's history of disparaging, disrespecting, and erasing Native people, and how this tragic history is reflected in the biases on exhibit during Representative Haaland's confirmation. This is clear when we see how few Republicans could even acknowledge the historic nature of Representative Haaland's nomination, choosing instead to focus on hostile questions about her tweets and whether she understands the law. Now, sadly, these attacks on Representative Haaland that she's been subjected to are not unique. We have seen this dance play out time and time again with Biden-Harris nominees, especially women of color. Excellent nominees like Secretary Vilsack and Secretary Buttigieg faced relatively tame confirmation processes. The vast majority of their questions were about policy goals and their experience. No senator referred to these nominees as extremists or radicals. But how did the women of color fare? In the Banking Committee, my Republican colleagues grilled Secretary Fudge, our new Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and a black woman, about her intemperate comments on race. This is less than 3 weeks after our former president incited an insurrection of white supremacists, among others, and faced, essentially, no consequence from his own party. Neera Tanden was forced to withdraw her nomination to lead the Office of Management and Budget after some declared that her Twitter account was too divisive. Well, if we had only known that mean tweets could disqualify you from public office, we could have saved ourselves 4 years of division and chaos and 2 impeachment trials. After a torrent of inflammatory and hateful rhetoric from the former Twitter account of our former president, which most of my Republican colleagues said they tried to ignore or just hadn't read, strong opinions from strong women of color are deemed unacceptable and cause for disqualification. I'm just not buying it. In my first floor speech in this chamber, I said that when you really listen to women, you begin to understand all the ways in which women are made less and are denied opportunities to contribute to their community and to their country. So I urge my colleagues, don't let this be one of those times. Let's not silence these women and deny them opportunities to lead because we're uncomfortable with their power. During Representative Haaland's confirmation process, I started to get text messages from women friends, especially Native women, horrified by the yelling and the condescending questions that were directed her way. We were proud of how she responded with grace and with dignity, and we all knew how it felt. I would bet that every woman in this chamber knows what it feels when this happens. A man talks down to you, uses his power to explain something that you already know, and signals in 100 different ways that you don't belong in the room where it happens. Well, for a long time, women have found ways to respond to these affronts with grace, as did Representative Haaland and Ann Fudge and Vanita Gupta and Neera Tanden. And when I was a young woman, my mother, who was a very strong woman herself, used to advise me to just ignore these folks and go about my business. And even today, as I worked on this floor speech, I wondered, am I going to offend anybody? Am I going to sound too shrill? I bet there's not a man in this room who's ever worried about sounding too shrill. So, colleagues, tonight we will vote on Representative Deb Haaland's confirmation to Secretary of the Interior, and we all have a chance to restore dedicated, capable, passionate leadership to this important department. The choice to confirm Representative Haaland is indeed historic, but it is not an abstract opportunity. As Secretary, Representative Haaland will play a consequential role in combating climate change. She will also honor tribal sovereignty and strengthen the government-to-government relationship between the United States and tribal nations. And maybe, just maybe, her leadership will help us see the strength of Native women and all women, and not to be threatened by that. Our country will be the better for it. I urge my colleagues to support the confirmation of Deb Haaland for Secretary of the Interior. I yield back the floor.